have to sit there and like smile the whole time, not say anything while I'm waiting for it to turn on. It's in the way that you use it. Bum, bum. It comes and it goes. Okay. That was the song for the day. Eric Clapton. It was 3 6 Mafia once. I don't even remember what it was. I think it was 3 6 Mafia twice. Okay, let's have... And Catherine's coming in. I don't know why it didn't just let you. Here we go. Yay! We got two at the same time.
Ah, all at once.
Wow!
Hi!
It was just like that. Just like that.
Hi, Catherine. Welcome.
Hi.
So nice to have you.
It is.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Are you having an adult beverage?
No, I have to teach after this.
My experience is I can both have adult beverages and I can teach. Just I don't even know how I know that.
You know, if it was in my backyard, it might be a different discussion, but I do have to drive there, so.
No, that's
Well, fair enough.
Someday, maybe not on a live, ask me the story about partaking and then trying to clear my forms. Everything was above board and legal. Good thing I did not press send. But there was a little tiny thing in my voice, in my head, kind of going, don't do that. That's a bad idea. That's a bad idea. And I did not. And I'm really grateful. But I'll tell you the story. We'll talk about it. Do you guys get the feeling that the dog world has a kind of a soap opera feeling to it right now?
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, telenovela all the way. I'm a person. I like the tea. I don't like the discourse. I don't like people being hurt or feeling hurt or being attacked at all. None of it. I don't think any of us really do. But my God, do I love a good story.
Well, it's like unfolding drama. Like, I think some of us who really just want information are like, we're getting information. We're getting information that we want. And it's like, wow.
Yeah, Dr. Melanie's doing some really great stuff. I really like what she's doing, helping everybody understand some of the more complicated things that she seems to explain effortlessly and so simply. And it's really exciting. I feel an exciting kind of momentum right now. What do you think, Catherine? How do you feel?
One of the researchers came into the thread and clarified something.
Really?
And I was like,
oh, really?
Like, this is what we need.
I need to go take a look at that.
It's not about right and wrong. It's about understanding information. I was so excited to see her come in and say, I need to clarify something here. And then I had a specific question and I asked and she answered me. And I'm just like, this is how adults interact. This is how we learn.
Yep.
So,
yep.
I'm kind of excited that some learning might take place now. I'm just like really happy. Yeah.
I love it. Yeah, there's enough voices, I think, now talking about it and talking about the science side and wanting to be able to be open about these discussions and not have it. It's not new that we have had our language and verbiage kind of stunted because we are concerned about judgment in this community. This has been a long time. In fact, the startup that I was working with, one of the things is I was the only dog person on board and it was a dog business. And so one of my jobs was to educate the team on the dog world. And I had to explain to them that there were certain words that we couldn't use because it would immediately place us in certain categories. And
the D word.
Yeah, there were a lot of things. Well, so what the social media person actually went and liked a video that had a shock collar use. And so then I know, right? So then of course I was getting messages from people that were like, did you know this? And so we had to have a whole discussion. But I didn't even realize how much we have to do for that until I had to break it down for people that are not in the industry. And I realized, I had to do an entire presentation because if you go from training style to spay and neuter to rescues and breeders to, it's a lot.
Yep.
So yeah.
And you have to know what you can say according to what side you're on. So there's
Yep.
a lot of rules. It's very complicated.
There
And every
are.
once in a while, I'll be talking to
Ain't
someone
that
and they'll
the
say
truth?
one of the bad things, like, and I'll be like, whoa, do you even know what you just did? Like, I just like let it on go, but I'm like, oh, you can't say that. It's amazing how many things we have, little hints.
Mm-hmm.
To use
Somebody,
cues or commands. That answer alone, cues
Oh, yeah.
or commands.
Cues
The
or
littlest
commands.
things like that.
yeah,
Littlest things.
that it took me
Yep.
a very long time to change that language. And nobody said I needed to. It wasn't like anybody came out and said anything. I just noticed that you didn't say it, Denise. I was like, that's
Right.
weird. And then I was like, why does she? And so I was curious and I just went and looked. And then I caught other people saying Q. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to consciously, every single time I say it, I'm going to correct myself in the moment until I get it. And
Yeah.
sometimes occasionally now I'll still do it. But I don't expect other people to change their verbiage to,
No.
to make me feel better. But I do know that there was a point where I had this awareness that, like, I don't want to say that anymore. I'm not going to say that anymore.
There's
And to just try to make
certain
a
things.
change to do it differently.
There are certain things that just fit, right? Like I think between command and cue, it just fits. It just feels better to say cue
Mhm.
anyways, because
Mhm.
command feels a little icky to me, at least. Yeah. And so it was never a favorite word for me. And cue always worked. And honestly, I don't even say it that much. What I say is ask.
Mm.
Ask your dog to do this. Ask your dog to do that. And so I use the word cue only when I'm talking to other trainers, really.
There was some time ago, the AKC made some changes to some obedience stuff. They also use the word command when relating the judge to the handler. So it says, the judge will command the handler forward 5 steps. And I just went, that's gross. The correct word there is direct. The judge will direct the handler. And just even that language, I thought, I actually wrote a blog about this way back when, but I just think it sets the tone. And when you're commanding people, like I don't command people. I mean, that's like, ew.
Yeah.
You volunteered to be there. I have no power over you. I'm going to direct you through this program because I'm the judge, and you're the person signing up to be judged. And with my dogs, I don't like the idea of making them do things. I don't get upset when people say command. I don't mind at all. I wrote a book and I specifically chose the word command over cue because the book was targeted to the pet audience and I didn't want to confuse them any more than I thought I might be confusing them with the topic. So I used the word command and I got called out on it. And I'm like, you know what, guys, recognize your audience and what's the goal. And for me, the goal was helping people understand how to get cooperation, not obedience, cooperation from their dog when they don't have food, when they're away from home. Like that was the whole thing. I was like, that's going to be enough of a brain bender for most folks. You don't need to make it harder. And then the second book I wrote in the series, I used the word cue because I felt like now people were warmed up.
You can transfer them over. Yeah.
I thought so.
You did a cue transfer.
I did. Did that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that I spend a lot of time figuring out how to communicate with pet parents and with layman people about these things. And honestly, I don't spend a lot of time correcting them. When somebody is telling me that their dog is dominant or their dog is alpha, I don't usually spend much time on it unless it is relevant, right? If they're like, the dog is doing this because of this, well, okay, we'll have a conversation about it. But when they're using it, I know what they're describing, right? I know what they're trying to tell me for the most part, and I might ask questions to really identify exactly what it is. But for the most part, I don't need to go into it because it's semantics. I know what they're talking about when they say it. So, yeah, there's a lot of that stuff. Alpha,
Language.
dominant,
Semantics and dog training is an overarching topic. I was put in my place by someone that is, kindly by someone that hunts with dogs, and I don't even know that I meant to correct what was being said. I think I was just trying to add to the conversation, and I used my language, and the person turned around and said, "You knew what I meant," and that was semantics. And I was like,
Every once in a while.
but I have to say that that was effective for me, because I was among people who were very, very, very skilled at what they do, and that was not up for discussion. Like, it was plainly in front of my face. It was interesting. They were using some terminology that I've never really heard before. And I just realized, kind of like, wow, we are really over talking so much. So many things to an audience that is not at that level that we are at. And some of that level is just craziness and obsession about about the topic. But I think some people,
But you know
also
what, you
just
really
don't care to be that interested.
They don't
yeah.
care. They want the
okay.
training
That's
to
what's hard
work.
for me. It's okay that they don't care.
Yes,
They don't have to like goats as much as I like goats. They don't have to like dogs as much as I like.
No.
You know, it doesn't make them a bad person or not deserving of help or information just because they don't want to take it all the way down into the station like I want to take it.
Oh,
I'm really
people
careful about language. I listen to the language they're using with me, and I try to reflect it back, because pretty quickly you can tell in very little time if a person, if they're in the dog world, if they're 1 month in, 1 year in, 5 years in, simply
Right.
by their language and the way the words they use across the board. Like you said, spay and neuter. What do they feed their dog?
Yep.
How do they, the language of the training, you can get a huge amount of information in no time at all. And then I'm just like, all right, this is about where this person is at, and that's the language we're gonna. And it's not even conscious. It's just you just reflect back, about what they seem to be offering you. Somebody says here,
go ahead.
Oh, it just says, I saw a post saying that the word boundaries is a red flag. The reason that concerns me, I know what you're talking about. It's the same as saying structure. Structure, boundaries, leadership, these words set off flags in a percentage of the plus R world. And the reason that worries me is that those are common use words with pet people, and they understand them. So I like to talk about boundary, structure, and leadership because it's intuitive to your average client. But I'm a little more careful if I'm speaking with a dog trainer who might have an agenda, and who's going to get upset. Because I'm not, sometimes I'm trying to upset somebody. I mean, I hate to say that, but it's true. But most of the time I'm not trying to upset people. So then I'm careful not to use those words. But it's a little bit sad that when I use the word boundary, leadership, or structure, that some people's eyebrows go up. Like, that concerns me because that's common language.
So
common language
this is a concept that's important for us all. Last night, and I'm really glad I was listening to this Audible last night to have this information. This information, or this term, is, people have heard it. It's called code switching. When I think of code switching, I think of African American vernacular. And I think of African Americans switching to what's appropriate versus what, but that's just because that's what's in my brain. Code switching also has kind of a negative connotation, because it can be actually used as a very effective method for, like, not mind control, but like in cults. And so people will say one thing to this person to get what, but inversely, code switching can actually be very positive if it's done in the spirit of what Denise was saying. If it's done in the spirit of trying to connect and communicate with someone in a language and that they can understand, code switching is incredibly powerful. That's why sometimes I talk in a Southern accent. That's why sometimes this is my actual voice. It's just because it depends on who I'm talking to. And if I want to be really folksy and I think that that's going to be better for the moment, I'm going to do that. If I go ask Denise a question, or if I go ask Michael Shikashio something, I'm going to pull out my big words as best I can. Or I'm going to say, I'm really struggling. I don't understand. Can you give me the language for this? I wouldn't say that to somebody else necessarily. But that was so interesting to me, how code switching is powerful in the hands of a person with a proper motivator, with a healthy motivation.
To connect.
Yeah, it absolutely can be. You know, it's like the way that I talk to other trainers is completely different than how I talk to clients. It just is.
Yeah.
When I'm talking to people who are in the science field, it's a different kind of conversation than when I talk to somebody who's in the entertainment industry. Oh, which, by the way, you were talking about the soap opera. I 100% told a documentary filmmaker that he needed to get on the dog training industry and all of this because I think it would
The
make a fabulous
telenovela.
show.
Yeah.
It's getting hot, and I don't know where it's going to go.
I know.
That's what makes this like better than a soap opera. Because in
I
most
know.
soap operas, you can kind of predict because you got a little behind the scenes knowledge, right? You know what's actually going on.
Yeah.
I don't know where this one's going to
We
go.
don't
I'm like, oh
We have
damn.
the script. We don't
You
have the
said
script.
that
We
out
don't know.
loud, and it's going to get intense. And I'm actually really excited because I'm hopeful that we're going to get a little bit more factual and grounded, and then we can actually have the important conversations that really matter. How do we want to treat our dogs? How do we want to relate to our dogs? How do we want other people to relate? I think we can get to a much healthier, grounded place, but there's some stuff that has to come off the table first, because there's this like elephant in the living room of feeling like people are just not even agreeing on the most basic facts.
Yeah.
If we could get that cleared up a little bit, so we can at least agree about something like maybe it's not so black and white. If we can get away from the black and white, I think we could start having some really awesome conversations. So I'm kind of hopeful that, and it's not intuitive, because some of the stuff that's going to come out is actually sort of against my philosophy of dog training. But that's not the point. The point is we can't rest on a poor foundation. We need to be making really good arguments and conversations on solid foundation. And I think we might get to a better place into the future, but I don't actually know. So I'm like, wow, let's see what happens. So cool.
Yeah.
Katherine,
It's really cool.
What do you think about, like, when you're listening to Denise talk and she's talking about the conversations that we need to be having and the basic things that we seem to not being able to agree upon? What pops into your head? What?
It's interesting because I think it very much depends on which side of the community we're talking about. And one of the things I was going to bring up is all of this is also separated by the type of training community we're in. So we're talking about, all of this drama in the dog training community, but I'm also involved in drama in the dog agility community right now.
Yeah.
Which is a totally separate thing, right? But there's big drama going on over there.
Yep.
And it's a little bit different because we're talking about the safety of the dog walk, and there's a lot of conversation around it. And it's much nicer, I will say. Everybody's nicer over there. But it's still a lot of drama. And
it does. The thing I noticed about your agility drama, it's not my agility drama. We got drama in my world, but I'm not your drama.
Yeah.
Is sometimes I just wish they'd give it a rest. Like, I'm tired of every single time I get on the internet, it's somebody complaining. It's not that the complaints aren't valid, because I do read the arguments and they are valid.
Yeah.
But it just feels like these massive whine fests. Like they go on for hundreds of comments, and I'm just like, I hope sometimes you guys wake up and have a good day. Like,
yeah, right.
I hope this does not dominate your whole world. It
is a trend.
Yes, these things need to be addressed, but why must it always be so attacking? The judge set this terrible. You know what? Maybe the judge did a screw up. It's great. Somebody should be bringing it to their attention quietly, privately. Maybe the AKC. I don't know who, but to make it into these slow motion videos, and it's just like, God, you're harming your sport. You're harming the culture of your sport.
There are a few things there, right? So one, I agree with you. We are a sport that has a tendency to do a lot of complaining. There are a lot of pieces involved,
is this
right?
So funny. I didn't know this about agility. Y'all don't complainers.
Yeah. Okay, so agility is really interesting, right? And it's funny because I'm actually teaching a class at Bergen University right now on dog sports. So even more so than normal, I'm like digging into the history and all of this stuff. But agility has changed massively since it started, and that includes equipment changes. I mean, there used to be a 4-way dog walk that we took out. We've gotten rid of the collapsed tunnel. Our weave poles started out at 18 inches apart, then went to 20 inches, then went to 22 inches. Now we're at 24 inches. This is all safety stuff, because we learned that over time, these things would take a really big toll on the dog's body. So there's things that change all the time. Now, what I think is interesting about the dog walk conversation, and this is totally not what we're here to talk about, but
No.
I'm going to talk about it anyways.
We're flexible.
Is I brought this conversation up, and I'm not the first person that has, but I brought this conversation up in 2019. And at that time, the conversation started and died down pretty quickly because everybody was kind of like, yeah, that's fine. Your dog had an accident. My dog had an accident.
Right.
But that's, you know, a rare accident. It happens. We're doing things with our dogs. They could have an accident on a hike. Now, we're still seeing those conversations. There's still a lot of people saying that. But we're also seeing more people come out and talk about injuries that their dogs have sustained, things that they are concerned about. So I'm glad that more people are talking about it and it isn't kind of getting shut down. But I agree with you that there is a lot of placing blame, right? So don't make the course like this. Don't make like the course like this. And at this point, I don't know how any judge could possibly make a perfectly correct entry onto the dog walk based on all of the complaints that are out there.
For every dog, for every handling style, for every size, for every speed. And I mean, frankly, a lot of the issues in a lot of sports, not just agility, is because we've all gotten so good that we've taken away, you know, an opportunity to process, to slow down. It's like, no, it has to be faster, faster, faster. But it's not like agility is the only sport with this problem. And in my opinion, it's actually why some sports have become so reliant on aversives, because the difference between this score and that score can be how fast a dog performs some behavior. And in some cases, when I'm watching it, I'm thinking that's a very unnatural behavior I just saw there. The speed of that sit, the speed of that down or whatever. And it kind of makes me feel yucky. It's like, that's kind of unfortunate if the only way we can start winning is to make the dog's responses artificial. Because if you do anything short of that, a natural happy response is not as fast as a stressed have to hit it kind of response. So, I mean, to some extent, it's our own
excellence. When they introduce steroids into certain sports.
Exactly.
And you're like,
exactly like that,
dude. You should not be having 100 home runs in a season. You should not be winning 7 Tour de France's. Like, that's not. There's something illogical about this, and then that becomes the standard of excellence when it's artificial.
I would be very interested in seeing testing of adrenaline and cortisol in working dogs as a baseline different than our pet dogs. Because I think that we are, in a way, breeding them to almost have their own internal steroids going on, right? We are breeding them to have higher levels of certain chemicals. They can do these things. And actually, I will tell you, this is a big conversation I've been having the past couple of days. One of my biggest concerns is that when you really look at what we're doing in breeding programs, when we're talking about working dogs, so a lot with our protection dogs, a lot with our agility dogs, sports that require high energy, speed, high arousal levels, what we are seeing is that what we're actually doing is we are breeding out the ability for our dogs to have any sense of self-preservation, any sense of keeping themselves safe. And that's actually what's happening, is that, I know, because if they don't have that sense, then they will, you know, you tell them, go jump, and they could be jumping into a pool that has no water, but it doesn't matter. They're going to do it anyways.
Right.
And that makes it, of course, fast and exciting, but it also makes it way more dangerous.
Right. Now, somebody asked a question. They said, I was always taught a dog cannot perform any behavior faster than it responds to its marker. Yes and no. There is a way around that. If you pattern train your dog, if you're in a sport like IGP where it's exactly the same, you teach the dog the pattern. So what happens is the dog is actually not processing the marker. The dog is processing the moment that you open your mouth. And that's fast.
It's now, like running a sequence almost on like
exactly.
Exactly. Like a
You've
computer.
Memorized. At the 12th step, I'm going to hear the word sit the first time, down the second time, and you can pattern train. And then, but there's things you're going to have to do to avoid the dog from going too fast, right? Like before they're cued. But that tends to be punishment oriented, right? That's how you avoid that too. So you can teach a dog that they know what's going to come, and they need to do it really fast as soon as the word comes out of the mouth, right? If you're in a sport that doesn't allow for that because the dog doesn't know what's going to happen next, agility is a good example of this. It's going to be a lot harder to do that, right? Now, a dog is watching your body more than listening to your words, I assume most anyway. Yes. So then the fastest the dog can ever go is based on the handling of the human. But imagine if there was an agility course that never changed. So you did it every time you went in the ring, you did exactly the same thing. You would find speeds would go up dramatically because all of a sudden the perfection of the handler falls off the table. So it's really helpful to look at the sport you're training for and how you train. I do pattern train when I'm trying to build confidence in a dog. I'll just do the same thing over and over so they can't get it wrong. And then they're winning. But it's not my natural style, so I don't stick with that even in sports that have patterns because it's not interesting to me. I just like to make it
dog. It's not interesting to the dog either.
Yeah. Right. So I'll say sit, stay, throw an object, and then ask my dog to lie down. And the dog at the first time was like, what? Like, that's not what you say here. This is where you say fetch. Right. I'm like, no, I did say lie down. And now I'm going to say something altogether different. We're going to heel away. And 25 yards away, I'm going to say fetch. And you're going to be like, that was 2 minutes ago. But when you train that way, what you get is super verbal responsiveness. Like I was running through cues last night and he can wallop out 15 or 20 with no errors really fast, but never faster than a dog that was pattern trained to do the same 15 or 20 behaviors. It's just that I need him to listen because it's how I solve problems, right? It's how I retain control, basically. It's just interesting to me that as sports get more and more competitive, as handlers get more and more competitive, as speeds are going up, these things are not, they're all related. And we have to kind of recognize them as kind of what they are. I don't know what the answer is. I do see a lot of complaining though. I'll tell you, I have a lot of unhappiness out there.
Can we parlay this into talking or segue? Let's do it all. Into talking about time frames and the use of aversives. And I don't mean to make this into a conversation about what people should and shouldn't be doing at all. Let's not say that. Let's take aversives off the table. Let's say time frame. What is the effect of expecting a faster time frame in pet dog training? How do we take this concept that, wow, this is really affecting agility, this is affecting sports, and now make people aware that this is also affecting pet dog training? If we're expecting certain behaviors from dogs in 2 weeks and for that to just be what it is that correlated to the use of aversives and increased use in aversives, is having those expected time frames?
This like the question of would aversives make the training process go faster?
No, I think because we all have our own opinion about that. I guess what I'm asking is, how do we break down the concept for people that I think a lot of people are using aversives that may actually not really even want to or care to because they think they have to because it must be done in this certain time. How do we tackle that? How do we, because I don't know, or I would have already been talking about, I mean, I know what I did. I completely changed delivery methods so that I have different time frames with my clients, and I talk to them every day, and I teach them concepts that are, I think complicated. I mean, they're not to us, but they were at one time to me. And I break down these concepts over like 4 to 6 weeks daily, as opposed to, let's say, sessions or a board and train or places where I have found that it is more likely for people to be using aversives. Is any of that making sense?
I mean, I don't run into a huge amount of pushback with aversives, although I will say that most of the regular pet owning public is not aware that what they're doing would be classified that way.
Right.
But timing wise, that one is a little bit iffy for me. From my experience, the positive reinforcement goes faster anyways. People like it. It's pretty easy for them to latch onto it. So we don't even really end up having those conversations. I focus on what to do rather than what not to do. So that's always my focus with my clients. So if they're doing something, like recently I was working with a little rescue Chinese crested, and he was, I mean, when I showed up at the door, he went after my feet, grabbed my shoelaces. Yeah, and he has a bite history. Like he's a pretty serious little dog. But one of the things that they were doing, they were like, we only want to do positive. This is really important to us. And I was like, great. And then they showed me their shaky can. You know, they're not,
Yeah.
it's pet people, right?
They don't know. Yeah.
They still think that that is completely within the realm. So when they showed me that, I explained to them, okay, so the issues with this are that we could run into an issue where we have sound sensitivity. This can often trigger sound sensitivity. He could be afraid of cans, right? So let's be aware of all of these things. I said, but it really does stop him barking in the moment. I said, okay, great. Have you noticed the barking stopping overall or just in the moment? I said, just in the moment. Okay, so let's come up with a plan that stops it overall, because otherwise you have to have it there all the time. It's not. So I just explain it to them. You know, I just work with them.
I like to tell them, we can reinforce a different behavior. We can punish them. Is that what you want to do? I just say it really plainly to people. There are not this big bag of tricks that I'm holding in my back behind you. Like
Right.
that we've got food, we've got toys, we've got a leash. That's what we got. You know, so if we don't use these things, what are we left with?
Right.
Punishing? That seems, and then at that point people are like, oh, I see what you're saying. And I'm like,
Yeah.
right. So
But that's
let's use the food, let's use the toys, let's use the leash. Because it's not, again, I don't want to make it seem like we're like, this is a place for everybody to come and listen and come and learn. Balance trainers are welcome. That's not, but I just don't talk to my clients about punishment, because people are naturally automatically doing it anyway, because none of us are perfect. There is no person that hasn't accidentally yelled or lost their temper or done something that, you know, would be considered punishment. We're all doing it. Even the best of the best force-free trainers,
of course,
you know, can't be saints. And so I just don't say anything about it. And if I do, that part I say to every client, exactly what you said, Catherine. Like, I just want to teach you how to get your dog to do things that are successful, that will help them and you, and that are safe for society. And let's not worry about being a constant nag about what we can't do.
Right.
It's so much more fun.
And
so
at the end of the day, it's their decision.
Yeah.
Their dog.
Yeah.
And I've had people, I will never forget, I had someone once who, she was asking me for advice, and she straight up told me, she said, look, I spank my kids and I have no problem with that. I am going to spank my dog, and there's nothing that you will tell me that will change that. This is how I just went, okay. I'm not going to take your advice. I can try to give you tips on like how to do this. This was also years ago, by the way. But the point being, at the end of the day, this is this person's dog. If I sit there and argue with them about their methods, they're just going to go somewhere else. Like that's
Absolutely. So also, if you show them how to do stuff, the conversation, like if somebody comes into one of my seminars and the dog has tools, I don't say anything. It's just basically a non-issue, because I don't use tools. So we're not going to be using it. But I don't need to shame. I don't even need to say a thing. And I find that often if they come back, that it's just not there the next time or the next time. You know, it goes away. But this comes up a lot, that, well, positive reinforcement is slower. I don't think it's slower. And Catherine, I heard you start to say that. I actually think it's faster.
It is.
It's just, the question is, what are you trying to teach? Because dogs that are engaged and want to learn very, very fast. There are some things that are slower because behavior change. If you're actually really trying to change who the dog is, that is slower, but that's not slower in the sense of, it depends where you're going.
Yeah.
Like, what's the goal?
Yes.
If the goal is that your dog doesn't lunge at your guests, and you have tools on the dog, and I'm not making a judgment here, I'm just going to say this. If you have tools that make that impossible, right? Because the dog knows if it lunges, it's going to be really uncomfortable. You may have solved your problem if that was the goal. And then that's fast.
Yeah.
Positive reinforcement doesn't usually have that as the goal. The goal is usually that the dog is more comfortable with the person, and that's slow. But the same is true of all training methods. It's really what are you trying to do. But when it actually comes to teaching, like sit, down, stand, I would put my money any day on my ability to train a dog with fewer repetitions using food and toys than somebody else using some other method. And as those of us who are watching the science are sort of like paying attention now, balance trainers are saying straight up, it's better to teach with positive reinforcement. If you're going to punish your dogs, that's another step, has to do with proofing. Fine, that's another thing altogether. But the actual teaching of behaviors is faster if you use positive reinforcement. I think it's debatable about proofing behaviors. I think you could make an argument that it's faster to use balance training. I actually don't know the answer to that, but I will say that for the actual teaching, I think it's pretty hard to beat positive reinforcement. And I think most balance trainers would agree. The question is, what do you do next? And then that's another, but that's a different conversation. It's not about learning. Well,
yeah, and there is so much nuance to this conversation, but one of the things that I always think about when it comes to getting the speed of a behavior, I do think that positive reinforcement is faster in general. I think the reason why it is perceived as slower is exactly that, is when we're talking about behavior modification, the focus of positive reinforcement is to change the underlying emotions, not just the outward behavior. And corrections often are intended to suppress, not always, but that I think has given a lot of people the impression that it is faster than positive reinforcement. But I got to tell you, even with behavior modification, I have my clients all the time who have been to balance trainers tell me that they get faster results with me. So I actually think the bigger issue is the learning curve. I think it is not a natural thing for most of us to think about things with a positive reinforcement kind of framework. Yeah. We tend to be reactive. It's so much easier to punish and be reactive because you don't have to set anything up. You don't have to think about it ahead of time. You just react in the moment. And if you react in the moment and it gets the dog to stop, that also feels good to us. And we're primates. We are very good with punishment, much more so actually than dogs. And so, positive reinforcement requires you to think ahead a little bit. It requires you to kind of think about the antecedent arrangement and planning ahead for when you can reinforce behaviors. And that is a learning curve for most humans.
I think it's a learning curve for trainers too, because a lot of those conversations are difficult that you have to have with clients when you have to explain to someone, I get that you want to go get a frappuccino with your dog. I understand that. But what I'm saying to you is that I don't think that you're ready for that and it's causing problems. And then they're like, and you have to, you know what I mean? You have to make sure that you're saying it in a way that they can hear you and receive it and process it.
Yep.
And I tell you what, I did not used to be good at that. I just cringe when I think about how hard I was on some of my clients. Like, I don't even have a word for how embarrassed I am. So hopefully they forgive those poor souls have forgiven me. But what I noticed was the reactivity, my own reactivity, my own ego, my own defensiveness, my own assumption that they should know what I'm talking about or have had any experience at all in this area. One of my clients, her name's Jiayu, and she has a standard poodle named Arwen, and she lives in Toronto, and she immigrated there from China. And she told me the story today of her family, which I will keep private. But she told me the story in response to me telling her that I felt like she was in the top 15% of pet dog like parents because of the way, just how hard she's working, her choice to go with a really good breeder, just all the things. And then she was like, oh, well, actually, my parents aren't dog people. And then she went in and told me the story. And I thought, wow, like if I had been how I used to be, I would have been hard on her. And I wouldn't have sat and taken into consideration that I needed to get to know her long enough until she was ready to tell me that story. And then once she told me the story, I was like, actually, I think I could push her a little harder, because she let me know some things. Like, I am really strong and I'm really motivated. And I don't know, it just made me think about how much we could potentially be missing by focusing so much on the dog training and
Yes.
not the communication side, which all of us do, but just as a larger community.
This is a nice little segue into the fact that I am developing a presentation about how to get client compliance and success, because that's always been a focus, right? So I am out here in the dog training industry with all of the drama right now, doing a lot of promoting of the use of positive reinforcement with your communication skills with other humans. And there is a reason I do this with clients, and I always have, because before I was teaching humans how to train dogs, I was still training dogs, but before I was teaching humans how to train dogs, I actually grew up in a household that was very focused on human interactions. My mom is a life coach. My parents did a leadership program when I was very young that they got very involved in. I did it when I was older. I coached people. So I have a lot of experience in effective communication techniques, personality styles, and how to address them each and have that success that you want to have. And one of the biggest things is not judging them and not chastising them for what they are using, what they have done. I have had clients that will start crying because they were worried about being judged. And the fact that I'm not judging them is such a relief. Like that, but that's terrible that has to happen.
I know. It happens all the time to me
I
too.
know.
They'll just break down in tears. Like, I'm just so glad that I'm here. I've been so confused. I felt like I was a bad person, you know. So I'm just like, oh, I'm so sorry.
I know. I'm sorry you had to deal with that, because that's not fair.
Yeah.
It's not fair.
I think having a trainer who says it doesn't matter, it's all right, we're going to get through this together, is like, for some people, it just, the sun comes out. Because when you feel alone, and sometimes your own family's against you, right? You know, you got one person say, you solve this or we get rid of the dog. You can have some pretty high stress interactions, and just having somebody like, it's going to be all right. I'm going to walk you through this. We'll get there.
Today,
it's just like,
one of my other clients.
That's the thing. I tell people, I'm like, look, I'm on your team now. You have an issue, you text me. We are in this together. That's the idea. So I have changed my model. I used to do a lot of training. I used to do 15 classes a week, private sessions all day long. I have pulled it way down. I have a smaller amount of clients, but I am able to assist them consistently. I can respond to their texts in the moment. You know, the other night I had a client text me and they said, okay, so new issue, the dog is resource guarding right now. What do we do? We can't get the thing back from her. And so I talked them through it, right? But I love that. And it is really important to me that my client knows that I am on their team, that we're working on this together. It is not me preaching about what you do. It's not me judging you for doing it wrong. We're in this together.
I love that you are accessible.
Yeah.
Because I think that accessibility it's a big deal for folks who are hurting and struggling. Just somebody to say, what do I do right now? Wow. I mean, that's
how people get sober. You call your sponsor and you go, I'm freaking out and I'm going to walk into this bar right now. Right now. And
this is an interesting note.
Okay.
This is kind of funny. I was actually going to say, I actually don't drink. It's funny that we were talking about that earlier, and I was like, why did I even go through that whole conversation? I haven't had a drink in I think I haven't even counted 7 years. But what's interesting is my dad's side of the family has a lot of alcoholism, and my dad is absolutely fantastic, has been sober for 35 years. I grew up going to AA meetings, and I know that sounds hilarious, but as a little kid,
my kids did too.
Yeah, I would go to AA meetings. So that also had a huge effect on how I look at things, because, I mean, that's a very specific place, and it's a very specific way to interact with others, right? The non-judgment, but also holding people accountable. That's
my daughter used to say she wanted to be an alcoholic when she grew up. Her perception, we would leave the meeting and she would be like, people would be like, what do you want to do? And she'd be like, be an alcoholic. And they're like, what? But her perception of alcoholics were that they were these people that came into this room and all helped each other live life. And that's what she thought an alcoholic was. And I was like, well,
I think 12 steps should not just be for recovery. I think that people should be using the 12 steps throughout their life. Honestly, there's so much to it, and the way that you interact with other people. There's a lot of really, really great stuff there that I think we often overlook. And as a little side note, when I was a kid, because of this, I would go to birthday parties, and at the end of the birthday song, I would sing, "Keep coming back."
It works if you
And
work
everyone would look at me like, what are you
you would say the
talking about?
Lord's Prayer at the end of birthday parties.
Yeah, it was
You know,
pretty
something we were talking about, Jerri and I were privately talking about, is the challenge for some people of holding two things in their mind at the same time. And you just gave an example, Katherine, of a person you cannot judge and hold accountable at the same time. And I think some people have a really hard time wrapping their head around that.
Well,
because
I think it's because nobody's done it for them. I don't think they've
experienced I don't know.
Yeah.
It's not, and you can't do it without thought. I can't naturally be that way without taking one extra second. Just one extra second. Everything that needs to be said can be said. You just need to take an extra second. And that second is what's going to make the difference between words that shame and judge and, quote, hold accountable, and words that accept and hold accountable. Like they can absolutely both be true, but I think it takes practice and desire.
Lots.
Right?
Yeah.
You know,
I just put a video out about it the other day, you guys. If you're interested in seeing what we're talking about, like in an actual scenario, I caught someone abusing their horse right in the moment. And you know, I am like a street person, so I'll just march into any scenario. Like, I'm not scared for my physical safety hardly ever. So I'm not, I want to, you know, say that that's something to consider. I don't think we should always just march in and start saying things. But in this particular scenario, it was a young woman who I suspect was probably 16 or 17. And I heard the sound of a whip being used in a way that you don't use a whip. And, you know, the community that I'm in the barrel racing community, people can say the things that they say about it, but everyone is a true horseman. Like, they love their horses. They put their whole lives into these horses. They're trailering horses to a 7-hour event to get a ribbon because they're so excited about just doing this. So generally, you really don't see things like that where I am. I can't speak for the places. But she was trailered near my daughter, right on the other side, so the next horse over. And I looked up over her horse and I saw that she was lunging this horse and whipping at the end of its legs really, really loudly, which is, of course, not something you would ever do. And I turned and looked at my daughter like, this is the look on my face of, now you know that I have to go over there. It doesn't matter what you say to me. It doesn't matter, Mom, don't. I need for you to know that if this ever happens, watch what I'm about to do. So I just went over, whoa, oh, wait a minute. Like, I wanted her to know by the look on my face, like, if you don't stop, I'm coming over there. So you either need to stop or you have to be ready for me to come over there and take that out of your hand. It was very clear to her. And she stopped and just, I'm fine. You don't look fine. You don't look fine. You look very, very, very upset. And the second that came out, no, I said mad. You look really mad. And the second it came out of my mouth, she just dropped her hands and burst into tears. And like a little girl. And her horse is just, that's a lot of energy coming out of that big animal. You know, it's just a lot. And so I just grabbed her, like, and hugged her, like, okay, everything's fine. Everything's fine. Let's just take a second. Whatever's going on right now, I promise you later tonight, you are not going to look back on this moment and want to keep doing what you're doing. I had to come over here and stop you because I've watched you race after race. I've seen you multiple times with your horse. I've never seen any behavior like this from you ever. And your horse is terrified. And so just take a breath with me and we can talk about maybe what you can do, but this is not the answer. And she knew, like, she wasn't, a lot of times people do stuff out of frustration because they just don't have any other thing. They just don't have it at that moment. They even might have it, but in that moment they can't pull it out.
Oh yeah.
But it was just, and she was okay. The horse was fine. I don't think she ever physically touched him with the whip, but the damage in that moment psychologically to the horse had been done.
Yep.
And he needed to be put up and left alone, in my opinion, for the rest of the night, and just left to eat and calm down. But the interesting thing was my daughter. When I came back, she was sitting on the ground, and just her face, like, what did she say? And I said, she started crying, Layla. What do you think she said?
Yeah.
And she's like, well, I saw you hugging her. And she's like, I just don't, why was she doing that? And so then the greater lesson for me in all of that was having to explain to my daughter that people do things that they are not going to be proud of later all the time. And there's a fine line between when you step in physically with your body and when you just let something go. And it's hard to know. It's hard to know. For her at 14, she was not going to step into that. If it would have been a friend, she would have said something. But she just didn't have the language or understand how, but she saw me do it. Yeah. She saw me do it, and she saw me not yell at her, which is not the answer.
Show compassion.
Ever the answer. You deal with a bunch of drunks and junkies and try yelling at them to get them to do anything. It's not going to happen.
It's
you know,
anybody. I mean, that's the whole, that's like why, we understand as trainers in the behavior world, when we're talking about dogs and redirected aggression, but what you're talking about was redirected aggression. That's what that was. It was coming out in an inappropriate way.
1000%.
And I think of everything in behavior. I mean, it's just, I've been doing this my entire life. I was human behavior, dog behavior. And so to me, it's all the same. I put it all in together. I think of it very much the same. And having that understanding, I try to treat people with the same compassion that I treat dogs with. And that sounds like it is so backwards if you were to think about like the general public, but we know in our dog industry that is often not the case. Our dogs often get priority treatment, better treatment, and we think that humans don't necessarily deserve that. And I don't think that, one, that's fair. Two, it's not effective. I mean, we've already established that we can use these kinds of methods. And technically, that is exactly what you were doing, right? You were interrupting her, and then you allowed her the space to show what her real emotions were, right? Whereas if you had gone and yelling at her, you would have just gotten a yelled response back.
Yeah, I mean,
her being freaked out and shut down.
I've been beat up in the streets, you guys. I've been stabbed. I've been violently assaulted in my life. So, like, the thought of, I just think it's interesting that people think that that's a way that's going to work. Like, I'm like, maybe you don't have experience in that area.
I don't think they think that.
What do you think that they think?
No, I think that they just want
thinking.
They just want their emotions to come out.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my point to that was that because I've seen so much violence, I just know that that's not gonna work. I just know you can't come at it like that because I've just been in so many intervention situations.
But don't you think dog trainers know? Like, if you go on one of these threads where everybody's just being absurd, like where they're so in the gutter, I don't even know what to call it.
Yeah.
When I'm watching those interactions, I am quite certain that nobody in that thread thinks they're going to be effective. I'm quite sure. So that's not why they're there. They're there because they're feeling things. So they're expressing themselves. And I have an expression. I say, do you want to be right or do you want to change behavior? Yeah. And often, if you just want to be right, you can just spew. But the act of spewing and you can be as right as you want to be, isn't going to change behavior. As a rule, if I want to change behavior, I can't even express my rightness. I can ask questions.
Right.
I can explore a topic. It doesn't mean I don't have feelings about the matter, but I know that if I want to change somebody's behavior, that's not the time. And because I do have some people in my life who are very challenging to work with, that's really hard. Like, I'm much better at it online in the dog world because there's a barrier. But when you're dealing with people in real life and you're kind of thinking, you're making a mess of this, and your anger is coming out, it gets really hard to step back and ask the questions and all, because you just really want to shake them, you know, and it's just like, well, I can't shake you. So, you know, it's very challenging. Online, I get super sensitive because I'm in this dog world, right? We're all in this dog world. And I watch people undermine my efforts to have intelligent adult conversations. They come onto my threads and they say terrible things. And I'm like, you're really causing harm. I understand it's making you feel better, but you're actually harming this entire thread with this aggressive, defensive, shaming thing. You're ruining it for all of us. It's like not about you anymore. It's about all of us. And I've often said, I don't actually care that much if people who have opposing opinions to me act badly, because they don't hurt me. They hurt themselves. They hurt their own perspective. Right. But when people who share my perspective act badly, that concerns me, because I want people to be able to hear me. And if I get thrown in the pile with people who are, you know, just emoting, then they stop listening to me. I saw it today. Well, those of you, who's you? Like, I know I was one of the yous. I could tell from the conversation. Them, they, you. I don't want to be, if I'm going to be in a them or a they or a you or an us group, I want to be in the calm, rational them, they, us group that people want to interact with, whether they agree or not. My concern is when I'm in the them, they, us group that other people think are just emotive and not able to be calm and rational and kind.
It's, you know, I first of all, I saw that my friend Sarah is in here, which is awesome. Sarah is absolutely amazing. And she put in here, there is an assumption in our society that people are inherently bad, and without correction, they will never become, quote, good. And this is a core idea that drives many ideas around parenting. So Sarah got her degree in applied behavior analysis. And so we have fantastic conversations about behavior and all of that fun stuff. But I was also going to say, one of the things that in this current soap opera of our industry is happening. One of the things that's happening is, man, people get really, really pissed off at me when I suggest for them to figure out what their intention is, because that's always been my, like, that's my driving force, right? That's how I figure out what it is that I'm going to do. What is my intention here? If you can't tell me what your intention is, then you probably don't need to say anything about it.
Yeah, that's actually a really powerful question. So when people ask me, and I learned it off of social media, a therapist on social media, when somebody would ask me a question that I found to be inflammatory or provocative, I was supposed to say, what is your motivation in asking me that question?
Ooh, yes.
And I use it all the time. I notice your dog's ears are cropped. Blah, 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 blah. What is your motivation in asking me that question?
What exactly is it that you want to get out of this conversation?
And sometimes the person goes, well, actually, I just had a question about blah, blah, blah. And they do have a good motivation. And I would have just torn into them.
Yes.
You know, on site. That's how I am about certain things. And so I've learned just to stop. Even in person, I'll do it. And she also said that you can say, why would you ask me that question? If it's something that's really like probative or personal or even inappropriate, you know, just to set some boundaries, like, hey, we could talk, but I need to know what your motivation is here. Because, and Denise has taught me, if somebody is not having a healthy motivation, stop the talkie time with them.
Yes.
Because
this has been listening to misunderstand.
Yeah, if they're listening, if they're listening to misunderstand, if they have a problem for every solution, you know, or they're doing circular semantics. I think those are key red flags to just excuse yourself from the conversation and go back to whatever you were doing, you know?
Yeah. Well, let me tell you, it was a little bit of a learning curve for my husband as well, because we would get into arguments and he would say something and I would say, what is your intention with telling me that? And he's like, why does it have to have an intention? And I was like, what do you mean? Why would you have words come out of your mouth towards another person if there wasn't an intention? And like, be clear on that. If you just want to say the words, go say them somewhere else. You don't need to say them to me. Well, because it's going to have an effect on me, right?
there better be an intention, because if you just harmed another person, I would hope you didn't do that mindlessly, right? Because often I'm thinking about those words, Jerry. I keep reading sailor, so I'm thinking sailor Jerry instead of just Jerry. But often when people come in aggressively, I have the same reaction as you. I call it my inner snarky. My inner snarky wants to come out. Now, I generally smash that down 99% of the time because I am an adult and I've worked on this for a long time. So inner snarky stays in. But there's still, I need to respond, and I want to be clear. Like, I want to say, I think you're being a not very nice person, but I love the way you phrase it, because just like you, sometimes I've said something and I realized it actually was a good intent question. And then I'm like, oh my God, I've become so suspicious. I assume ill intent, where often there isn't any at all, you know? So it's the why are you? And then my hackles go up and nothing's even happened yet.
Yeah,
I both
do have some
that.
hackles.
I know. I love
and that comes from past experiences too, right?
That's right.
I see it, you know, my mom was here last weekend. She stayed with us, and my brother lives with my husband and I as well. So my mom, my brother, and I were talking, and one of the things that my brother and I have come to realize, we have an absolutely fantastic family. Our parents are great. Honesty is the most important thing above all else. Both my brother and I have had to kind of figure out that there are times when people immediately don't trust us because of how nice we are and honest we are. I don't know if there are better descriptive words, but they actually interpret it as fake.
Yeah, because most of the time when people are doing that, there's an underlying manipulative motive, or because we all know now that most of us have messed up families. Most people, that's the norm, is that they had some kind of dysfunction in their family, some kind of unresolved trauma. And so when you meet someone who has like honesty as a bedrock, and I know exactly what you're talking about, Katherine, because I know so many AA families and people that like both the parents have been sober like 30 years and their family is just so like walking in truth telling all the time. It does have its own set of consequences. So of course you start telling a lot of truths and things start coming out you don't want to hear very much, you know, and you got to work through that stuff. So it's got its own like things.
Right. You get good.
But I think that my family is like that. I think that, you know, my daughter will say stuff to me and I'm like, I didn't need for you to tell me that. But because I recognize that what she's practicing is telling another human being her truth without being embarrassed about it. She's just saying it, you know, and I was like, God, I wish I would have had that when I was growing up. Like, just because
how amazing that you could give that.
Well,
that's so cool.
Different generations too. I mean, I was raised by parents, but my mom was very focused on. She just wanted me to be a good kid, and she wanted to do a good job as a mom, and so there was a lot of focus on kind of towing the line of what was expected versus maybe just sharing your real truth. And in reality, I don't know that my mom really knew how to do that at that time. I don't know that she had the wherewithal to instruct me in that. My dad has it, but he told me that he has it because he went to Vietnam. And he told me one day when my blue book was on the counter, he read it. He took it and he read the whole AA book. And then after he was done with it, he gave it back. And I had a couple of them, so I didn't know he had it. And all he ever said to me about it was, I said, oh my God, did you read that? And he goes, yes. And I understand now. And he said, it's the same as being in Vietnam. He's like, I can talk to people about it. I can answer their questions, but the only people that will ever understand what it was like were the people that were there. Yeah. And that was it. And he has always been, I mean, both my parents, very supportive in my recovery, but that connection was very interesting. Like, what does that mean for dog training? So if we use that premise of, if we ask somebody who's been there and we don't worry about all this other nonsensical stuff, we find somebody that we're like, wow, you seem to be really happy and have a really cool life. And, you know, I think I might want to do some of the things that you're doing. How did you do that? How did you get that? That's such a much better approach than some of the ways that people are looking for dog trainers right now.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And uh, you know, even when it comes to our communication with our clients, I remember a while ago, a trainer posted on TikTok asking other trainers and legitimately saying, how do you decide when to fire a client?
Mm.
And he kind of went on to explain that in this case, this client was continuing to pay him, but was not really doing the
Mm.
work. And,
Ooh, that's a good question.
well, so my response to that is I do not fire clients. Now, if we
Yeah.
have something, if there's like a real issue with communication, I might bring in another trainer, but that's not something I generally have because that's a skill that I really, really work on. But I don't fire clients. They are paying me. I mean, we have a small enough percentage of the pet owning public that actually reaches out to trainers in the first place. They want me to be there. The fact that we aren't getting the results means that we need to fix something, we need to tweak something, but that doesn't mean that I need to get rid of the client. They want it, even if they're not showing it. So
And
when something,
sometimes the consequence of that financial hit is enough to keep them close enough to get some answers. You know, they're like,
yeah,
well, I did pay the money,
it
you know, and then that
can't
sounds
be.
a little crass, but it's like, I,
No, it's
I
that,
kept a trainer that I ended up using for 2 years after I was like, well, I paid the money for this. I guess I better use it. And then I
right?
did. And then I ended up actually getting interested
Yes.
and actually finding a lot of benefit from it. So yeah, I don't fire clients either.
But in those
And
situations, like what he was describing, what I do is I sit down with the client and I say,
mm,
okay, so clearly you're not able to do the work that we were talking about. So what's up? What's going on? Do we need it to be easier? Is this too much information? Are there time constraints? What's going on? Let's figure out how to make a plan that you can accomplish, and then we go from there. But weirdly, I think that the biggest issue that people have with something like that is the honesty. I mean, you're directly confronting the issue. You're doing it with kindness, but it is very honest, and sometimes I think people are uncomfortable with being that
oh yeah.
honest.
I love that because this gets back to the you can say anything, but when you come in a very non-judgmental way and say, sit down, I want to talk this through. Let's talk about it. This is important. There's
Yeah.
nothing in that tone which is judgmental or angry. It's just a, hey, we need to have a conversation
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
because you are not doing your homework. So let's talk this one through. That's like,
Yeah.
you can say it. And, you know, I have to say, though, I struggled so much when I was young, you know, and when I say young, I mean like under 30. So like, let's say I had some kind of work done for me at the house and it wasn't high quality. Oh my God, I would fret. Like I didn't know how to say, hey, this wasn't really done to expectations and all. And I think partly it is age, especially if the person you're talking to is older than you. I think it's harder to
Mm.
speak up. You know, when you're young, now I'm getting old, so most of them are younger than me. That kind of works out.
It's a
But also just
strange
my
shift.
ability to kind of remind myself honesty, directness is not unkind. It just takes an extra second.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, it's freeing. It's so freeing
Oh,
to
so.
realize. And when I'm struggling, I go to my husband and he'll write things for me or whatever. And it's like, it's so obvious after he's done writing it. It's like, oh, all I had to do was be honest. But when you're in close, so helpful to have that outside person. And I'll do
Yeah.
that for him too. Like when
Mm-hmm.
I can tell he's feeling edgy, like
Yes.
he's on a phone call or something, I'm like, hey, why don't you let me take that? Okay. Cause like, you know, distance is your friend, you know, but you can say, and maybe people should just practice like before the words come out, like on social media, just, you don't even have to answer. Just how could I respond to this in a way that doesn't agree, that would be palatable to me if I was on the other side. You know, we can just sort of practice the behaviors and it really does get a lot easier.
Oh,
But at first it's, you want to be kind, but then you're angry and it's just all complicated, but you can get better with practice for sure.
yeah. I did a lot of my early career. So I started professionally training dogs, teaching group classes when I was 20. So the majority of the people in the classes were older than
Yeah,
me.
I
Which
bet.
and I was doing like leadership life coaching work before that when I was 18. So I was already pretty used to the idea of other people being really uncomfortable that someone as young as I was coaching them on what to do. I had already kind of been through that process, but it was still a lot, and it was still very difficult. And I got much better as I practiced it a lot and went along. But I also started my career at PetSmart, and so everything was customer service.
Right.
But honestly, it was invaluable education, because putting customer service first required that I get really savvy with my communication. And that was really, really helpful.
It's so
I didn't go
nice to have that stuff coming in, because I think a lot of people don't see how they can use their former careers or former jobs to cross over into what they're doing as trainers. Like if you've been a server, if you've worked at a clothing store, if you, I came from the vet world, and a lot of people maybe don't know this, but vet techs do everything except for the part where the doctor comes in the room and the part where the doctor does the cutting. Vet techs do everything. Preparing estimates, telling people what the estimate is, and explaining every line of the detail, and having people go, and having people get mad, and having people not know what to do, having clients yell, having, all that stuff. Like, wow, was that useful.
Yes.
People
So
get
you were a vet tech.
heated over their dogs.
You know where I learned it to communicate? I used to fire people for a living.
Oh,
I did.
No.
Yeah.
Like, wait, wasn't there a movie about that?
Wasn't not about me, but I
no,
know
there was a show that Donald Trump had called The Apprentice.
No. There was.
I'm kidding.
There was a movie about literally, it was their job. They were just hired to go in for like high profile jobs and just go in and fire people.
Wow.
Okay, it gets better. I loved my job. Here, let me explain. I worked for the federal government. The people, I was on the employee relations side of the labor divide. By the time I got a hold of these people, they needed to go. Like, because management, they may or may not be good at difficult employees. They could be awesome at running the office. They could be awesome at every part of their job, but that doesn't mean they're good at people things. And you've got the union supporting the employees. And there were some people doing some pretty outrageous stuff, and it can often be a slippery slope, right? So the manager doesn't say anything at first, and then it gets a little worse. And it's like, at what point do you speak up, right? And you start talking about stuff. And then we all know there are people in society that are pretty manipulative, right? And some of these folks are expert manipulators, some of these employees. Mm-hmm. And they've got the union who can yell like there's no tomorrow. Now, no. Employee relations, you must always be above board. But the labor was not under that same. So you've got managers who are often feeling incredibly cowed. And by the time I'm looking at it, I'm like, this is outrageous. I mean, really, like I'm looking it over. And my job was to teach, because I did not work with the employees. I worked with the manager. And basically, I was giving them the words. So I would write letters for them. But I didn't sit in the meeting when they're dealing. And so you would go over and over, helping these people find words that they felt comfortable with, that they could own. And you would say, what do I do when they start screaming at me? And you have to, well, it was real. Like, walk. This explains so much how. Huh?
This explains so much. I understand so much more about it now.
It was really helpful for my ability to say really difficult things in ways that were reasonable. And then I was also involved when the employees sued, which invariably happened, in preparing the documents before they would go before whatever board they wanted to go through. I really liked my job because I felt that it wasn't, by the time I was seeing them, it was bad. Like, it wasn't like random people who showed up to work 6 minutes late. It was some of the stuff was just like, you were surfing during your working time? Like, really, this happened, right? Like, he's out surfing. It was an attorney, and he wasn't even, you can't have a 3-hour lunch break and surf. Like, so it's a little hard to feel too bad when those are the kind of things you're dealing with. But I learned a ton. I also worked in criminal justice for 7 years before that while I was going to school. And I worked with pretty serious kids. And I mean, they were murderers and rapists. And you can be 17 and have done some pretty terrible things. It doesn't, it's not where I am. It wasn't really an age thing. You learn a lot about manipulative people who want things, and they're also nice, and they're trying to get, and you start to learn a lot about people and management. And then my husband was at HP. He was a higher level manager there. And I would listen to his conversations, which were the other side. Like we had a lot of parties at our house for his folks who worked for him. And I would see how he would build them up and how he would interact with them in such positive ways. Like even the ones that were giving him grief, he was really good at helping them be successful. And I learned a lot there too. Just, now I know how to fire people. That's useful. And now I know how to not have to fire them when they, and I mean, I'm really I have an online school. For those who don't know that, I have the most amazing people who work for me. So it's really, really easy because they're just all really good at their jobs. And it's by virtue of coming into the school, you wouldn't want to work there unless you were an independent player, and you just need certain qualities coming in. So I don't really have to practice the yucky stuff. Like it's pretty darn rare. But the positive stuff is really helpful because I remember every once in a while you need to tell people, like, you're awesome, you're amazing, I'm so glad we connected. You're just such an asset, right? You remember. I think I learned that from him. I picked up that skill. So anyway, there's my background in a nutshell.
That's really cool. I didn't know all of that. And what that brought to mind for me, not firing people, but when I worked the last rescue that I worked at, I would often ask, especially if I had been involved with the adoption, but even when I wasn't, I liked to process returns when we had return dogs or cats. And I say this because the majority of the time, people feel awful. Mm-hmm. They are really, really upset that they are doing this. And it's so common for them to be judged for it. And this is actually there's another situation where I've had people break down and cry. Mm-hmm. They are both upset that they are having to bring the animal back, but also they are so relieved that there's not judgment on the other side of it. And that's another thing, it's like in training and behavior, we talk all the time about one option is rehoming the dog, or, talking with the legit rescue that you worked with and having them rehome the dog. But if we can't recommend that if we constantly put judgment around it too, right? Like we have to give the grace for people to make that decision because sometimes it's the best decision. Mm-hmm. And when I talk with people about this, now mind you, I was very young, but when I would talk with people about this, I would always tell them I had a rescue dog that I returned. And it was, mind you, I was like 13, so really it was my family. But the truth of the matter was that it was a dog we had for 2 years. It was an English Springer Spaniel. She had Springer rage, and it got really bad, and she was attacking my other dog. We had to keep them completely separated. You couldn't know what the triggers were. When it was happening, she would absolutely go after anything around. Like it's actually a seizure disorder, we know now, but it was something at the time that was not studied, and it was just something that in the Springer world. Anyways, the trigger was focused mostly on other dogs. So once we rehomed her to a home with no other dogs, and she got to live out her life happily, right? That was the right home for her. And maybe that home wouldn't have been available 2 years earlier when I adopted her. And it all works out, and that's kind of how I like to view things. But I guess the theme is kind of overriding is not having that kind of a judgmental approach because it doesn't help anybody. And there are, I see videos of like rescues or shelters filming people as they're dropping off dogs, and it just drives me absolutely nuts.
No, that's terrible.
I know.
I've seen some of those, and it just turns my stomach.
God, I can't even imagine somebody coming in with a camera into my mom's hospital room as she gave me up for adoption, pointing a camera in her face, and being like, "Look at this." Mm-hmm. Oh my God.
Well, my family, our dogs went to the farm, and they didn't work out.
Yeah, the farm is the farm.
They went to the farm.
It was
but
different.
Again,
it was different.
I'm older than you guys.
Yeah,
so
it was
I'm
different.
like, I don't know how old I am, but I think I'm 55. I can't keep track anymore. The problem is I was born in 1968.
55 for the next.
So that makes me, but December. So I think I'm 55. All right. Well, anyway, back then I don't think that was that unusual.
No.
They went to the farm.
No, it wasn't.
You didn't talk to your kids about lots of things, right?
You just said goodbye and then they went.
They just
Yeah.
went to the farm.
Mm-hmm.
And I never asked my parents because, frankly, I probably believed that till I was like 30. I'll tell you this. The rabbit that, what happened to my rabbit? My parents told you. I can't remember. It escaped, or I don't remember something. I was a married adult sitting at a table with my husband and my kids when I asked my mom about that. Oh, no. She said, she goes, well, when the dog killed your rabbit, like it just like, and I'm like,
Oh,
wait, what? What? Like,
oh my God.
I didn't know the dog killed my rabbit.
She's like,
the rabbit just escaped the cage and got away.
So I had when my grandparents passed away, they had a little miniature poodle named Bubbles, and it was, known that we would take this dog, and she became my dog, and I loved her. She would resource guard the heck out of me. I thought it was the funniest thing ever. But she got really, she was probably 13 or 14, and she started vomiting, just some weird symptoms. And it went on for a few days, and I wasn't ready to let go. And my mom said, Jerri, this is cruel. Like, she's old, you need to. And so she went to the farm, the literal farm, like to go to the Rainbow Bridge, because my uncle had a farm. And so he was like, well, I'll just do it. So years and years go by, and one of my uncles one day says something about Bubbles getting run over. And I'm like, no, she got really sick. And he immediately was like, shit. And what had happened was he gave her a big shot of insulin, thinking that would, she would just get sleepy and pass away. And it made her better because she had diabetes.
Oh my God.
And we did not know that. And she lived. And she lived. She lived for like 3 more years. And then one day, she was out in the yard and got excited as my uncle drove up into the driveway, and he didn't see her, and he ran her over. And no one ever told. I was like,
years old.
Yes.
Oh my God.
People alive are gonna run out and get insulin for their old dog. Like, well, no,
you never know.
Nope, she lived, and it made her better, and she was fine after that. But you know what? She got lots of extra years on the farm.
Seriously, I mean,
what a story.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
it's a pretty incredible story, and I would hate to leave us on that note. So let's think of a different story. Katherine, go back and talk about, if people want to find you, learn from you, what's the best way to do that?
Well, socials. So Katherine K9 Trainer on Insta. I'm Katie McGuire K9 Trainer on TikTok, and on Facebook, I'm just my name, Katherine McGuire. And yeah, I have a YouTube.
Oh,
yeah.
You do? What is it? I'll put it in here for everybody.
That's a good question. I think it's the same. I think it's Katherine K9 Trainer. It's been a minute since I've looked. They're all very similar, just depending on what was available. It should be, Katherine K9. It should be. That one's actually been there for a while. There's a lot of agility, but I've got some tutorials too. It's weird. I am all over the industry. So I am very active in the sport dog world, but also I am a behavior consultant. So I have kind of an interesting crossover. And then I adore training like really novel, interesting, different things. So I do tons and tons of tricks. And actually my most popular video on YouTube is how to teach your dog how to use potty bells, because I teach it in a very different way, which now that video has been up for like 7 or 9 years. I can't remember. It's been up there for a while. So now there are lots of copycat videos who have done it with like much better production value. Yeah. So now the method is out there, which is an interesting element that we have in dog training. But and I'm in Los Angeles. So
that's the question I didn't ask you, is where were you? Los Angeles.
It's about 6-7 hours south of me. It's interesting you work for Bergen University, because my new ranch is 10 minutes from there.
Really?
Yeah, I was actually going to ask if they wanted me to just come over and do something. I'd be happy to just stop by.
I'm going to have to talk with you then, because we were talking about finding a place for them to, because they all have service dogs in training, which is so cool. And so we're teaching them how to do dog sports, primarily agility and rally. But they're going to need a place to be able to do it. We'll
yeah, send me a note. I'm happy to help out.
That'd be awesome. Yeah, this is the first time that I've done it, but it has been really, really fun so far. I mean, I get to talk about dog sports, so it's pretty cool.
Right.
That's cool. Yeah.
It's pretty cool. Yeah. You know, one thing I wanted to say, I like put my little notes down here that I think is really important, and it's something I've learned after years and years of doing this, especially because I've done a lot of group classes. I always speak to people in a way that anybody could understand, right? So I don't use like jargon or big words usually, but I also do not dumb it down.
Right.
And that is an important distinction, because I think it's very easy as a trainer to start sounding condescending to people without realizing it. And the thing that I would like to tell every trainer out there, you don't know what experience that person has. And do you know the amount of times, let me tell you the amount of times that I have found out after several weeks of a class that the person in the class is a vet or is another trainer.
And you just want to put your foot right in your mouth.
I had a client who was a
because I'm very.
Who's a what?
Yeah.
She
Like,
was a
oh shit, right? Like, you better watch your language and not to make too many assumptions about anything.
Yep.
Because you might be the dog trainer, but that person might run rings around you in their whatever it might be. So excellent.
I had an apprentice one time that was my client, and then she became my apprentice. And I remember instructing her about different things in the apprenticeship program. And later I found out that she builds courses for adult learners for a living, and she's among the best in her field, and also runs national campaigns and does all of this stuff. And she helps me build all the courses for Tulsa Pack now, and she just volunteers her time, does it for free. She's contributed to multiple scholarships, and here I'm like, now you don't want to do this.
We're all
never
learning.
Again.
We're all
Never
learning.
again will I do that
We're
to someone.
You know, assumptions I learned a long time about, and I try not to make them. But yeah, I think that only ever came back to bite me one time. Like, I started to act a little bit cocky, and then it turned out that person was like a serious competitive dog sport person, and I was like, oh no. That was very early in my career, and I learned my lesson, and I do not do that now. I always am. I assume that this person could know a ton. Now, that doesn't mean I leave information out. I still want to give them the information, and sometimes I'll ask, clarifying questions to kind of figure out where I should be focusing my information. But I am always respectful, and I always assume that they could know more than me in certain areas, and I treat them with that in mind.
Maybe we should leave it on that, huh?
I think so. It's a positive note. Everybody take a smile so I can have our screenshot. Very good.
So good to be with you guys.
So much.
Thank you. This was so much fun.
It's so fun.
It was. It's my favorite time of the week. All right. Denise and I will see you next week. You guys, we're going to have Lauren Frazier. And I know you may not know that name, but you know her.
Okay. You know her.
She's the chicken trainer. That lovely young Black woman that we found out is not, in fact, 12 or 13
She's not
years
as
old.
young as you think she is. So Jerri went and humiliated herself.
I humiliated myself.
No, sweetie, we're going to need to talk to your parents. So don't make assumptions about age either. That's the moral of the story.
Do not make assumptions. So I'm excited to talk to Lauren next week. And I assume you will be there watching Katherine.
Oh, yeah.
Cheering and asking questions, because I cannot wait to hear this young person's story. There's going to be a story.
I will be driving to the West Coast Open, so I'll listen there. Oh, last note, because I forgot to mention it, just so happened that it was on last Sunday. Last Sunday, the Western Regionals of the Incredible Dog Challenge, if you managed to catch it on NBC, I was on there.
God.
She's famous. We're hanging out with the famous people now. This is
I got a
awesome.
really nice call out. We ended up getting third place. It wasn't my dog. I stepped in last minute to handle for a friend. So it was a lot of fun. We actually got third place in large agility and in the weave pole challenge. So
Most
it was,
excellent.
yeah.
Congratulations.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. And there might be more stuff coming out later, but I'll let everybody know as I know.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for being with us.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Catherine.
Bye, ladies.
We
Thanks
had
for
such a
having
good
me.
time as always. And only one cuss word was said that whole time, and it was me, wasn't me?
Ooh.
Yeah. And I was repeating what somebody said, and so we're getting closer to that zero.
Talking about the code changing, what did you call it?
Code switching.
Code switching. I have code switching. I have my public speaking, which does not allow for any cuss words, and then I've got my non-public that is very different.
Mine has sort of blended over the years. I don't know what to say about that, but there's definitely been either evolution or devolution. I don't know how you decide, but definitely has blended.
Yeah.
All right. Take care, ladies.
Bye.
Bye, everybody. Thanks for joining us.